Welcome everybody to another day of deep learning and AI ethics. Our guest today is Zach Mueller, and Zach is a very accomplished programmer, and he's still a student, actually, an undergraduate at a senior at the University of West Florida in Pensacola, and he is I'm looking at my notes because I don't want to get it wrong. So he's majoring in software design and development with minors in computer science and environmental science, and he's currently a deep learning software engineer at a company called Novetta, and Zach is on Twitch and GitHub. He has a lesson series called Walk with Fast AI, and we'll put all this in the below the video, and I'll paste it in the chat a little bit. He's helped me personally innumerable times. He's a regular on the Fast AI Discord, helping people all the time. And so welcome, Zach.
Thank you, Scott, for having me.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about your upbringing and how your interest in technology or computers grew over time.
Sure. So my parents were both in tech. And so it definitely was home rooted. And so I kind of just had it all around me. And so, growing up, I dabbled a little bit with Raspberry Pis, IoT, and even computer programming at kind of a younger age than most people probably would. So it's not that it hasn't just magically sparked. It's kind of always been there in the background. But I definitely did not start out wanting to do tech, though.
Okay. And what was your programming background like before? How did you get into deep learning, and what were you doing before then?
Sure. So I started off with Scratch, which is the whole drag and drop commands and a little cat moves across the screen. I was doing that, I think, at 7 or something like that. And then it migrated from that to like controlling Lego Mindstorms. So that's like the robotic Legos that you can program. But I was very stingent with my parents and said I did not want to do tech at all. I was not interested in it. I wanted to actually do marine biology. And I kind of knew that that's what I wanted to do about 7th grade. But it didn't really pan out. And so my backup plan was always to do tech because it's a pretty safe field to go in. And so that's kind of where I took the foundations that I had growing up and started to apply them towards school to try and give me a little catch up, because I did switch majors like halfway through my college career. So I was behind.
And that is totally allowed. And I think most of the people in our class are currently about to graduate and probably have changed majors, but for other people who might be watching it, yeah, definitely people change majors and it's okay.
Absolutely. Graduating in 4 years is a stigma. Both of my parents graduated in 5, and I'm graduating in 5.5. So
5.5. All right. And
yes,
what was your first
quite a while?
What was your first encounter with machine learning like? Or maybe that's Scratch.
Yeah, so about 6 months into changing my major to computer science / software design and development, because it kind of came a little later, my dad actually sent me the link to the 2nd edition of Jeremy's course of Practical Deep Learning for Coders. And he was like, you should do this. But I was still the rebellious phase where I was doing tech, but I didn't want to do like tech because my parents were wanting me to do tech. And so I told him, no, I'm not interested. It looks scary, hard, and it's not going to be something I'm going to want to do. And then, I sat on it for a year, and then Jeremy released the next version. And so I took the 3rd edition, and it kind of spiraled out of that.
Now, the 3rd edition what year was that? That was pretty recent in terms of my elderly years. Was that 2019, 2020?
It would have been 2019.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what about it drew you in or attracted you or made it something that you wanted to keep going with?
Ironically, it was lesson one, pets, because I still had that minor in environmental science. And so I wanted to do something with the environment. And so, with Jeremy's first course, our lesson of, hey, we're going to make a dog and cat classifier in 5 minutes. And then you do it. And that's really what hooked me in. Because then I started talking with my best friend and we were like, oh, let's make a snake detection app for Florida to identify venomous or non-venomous snakes. And so my environmental science background was just spiraling, coming up with ideas from just one lesson. And that kind of is what got me hooked.
That's great. Now, lots of other people have done the Fast AI course. I myself have done the Fast AI course with considerable programming experience under my belt, and yet you seem to have really excelled even beyond a lot of other people in terms of teaching yourself quickly and getting really up to speed to becoming an expert. And I imagine that you have some things to share with us, some of your strategies or habits for teaching yourself or learning effectively. Do you have anything like that you could share with us?
Sure. I actually have been thinking about this quite a bit because I've been wanting to write an article on this actually. But very sort of carefully is how I approached it. So there's always the rule of spend an hour a day and you'll become a master over time. I kind of threw that out the window. When I started doing Fast AI, I worked a night job at the local library. So I worked there until 2 o'clock in the morning with no one there. And so basically that job became me doing Fast AI for 4 to 5 hours a day. Nonstop almost, watching course lectures, playing with code, so on and so forth. And that's not to say I went through the entire course in a month. I went through the course in a year and a half. I watched the first 3 lectures and really sort of honed in on computer vision for 6 to 9 months before I even moved on to another topic. And the reason why I did that is, and I actually recently found the video, is there was a video from Andrew Ng's CS 230 course where he discusses how you become successful. And what he described was called the T method. So you are adequate at a lot of things. So that's your breadth. There we go. And what you really hone in on is one area specifically. So if we're talking machine learning, that could be NLP, computer vision, tabular, random forest, and so forth. Then you pick one and you spend a good solid few months on that specifically. Become an expert, quote unquote, at that specific thing and have something you can talk about. And then over time, slowly expand that out if you can. But that was his secret to success. And so after taking the first 3 lessons of Fast AI, I just went all in on that. Computer vision, understanding everything I could at the time without, too much math. And really spending every day slightly tweaking my model, understanding how the Fast AI code works for computer vision specifically. What are augmentations? Everything I possibly could, I just got a hunger for that knowledge. And so when I'd work at the library 2 days a week, I would just feed it. I'd sit there for hours on end, reading through source code, reading through documentation, reading through random tutorials that people had posted until I accumulated enough knowledge that it was okay, let's go do something else now. And what that something else turned into was the second half of why I think I probably did something different than most people do. I wrote a course on it, not Walk with Fast AI, the first iteration of it. Walk with Fast AI was actually the third. Basically, I rehashed Jeremy's course for my college peers. There was 4 or 5 of us, so there wasn't a whole lot. But it was his course, and I just basically retaught it. And so what that forced me to do is understand, at least on some level, what the heck Jeremy was talking about. It was a study group.
There's a whole saying of, if you really want to understand something well, teach it to somebody else. And that's I've gained so much, not just as a professor, but even writing blogs and things, where I really start to, as you explain things, questions come up and Yeah, it's a great strategy. Please continue.
Absolutely. And that's exactly what I did. Because the first one was just like practical deep learning for coders, I think, on my repo. And then Jeremy started writing fast.ai v2. And I wanted to be a part of that because V1 is a little confusing to me. And I wanted to get better at fast.ai. And it's like, oh, the library is literally being built in front of me. I'm also learning coding on the side for school, so I can kind of understand where things are going and things are happening. And so I took it as an educational experience, learn how fast.ai v2 is being built. And so part of that was taking essentially Jeremy's entire first course, v3, and convert it over to v2. fast.ai version 2. This became the Practical Deep Learning for Coders 2.0 repo, which is currently sitting at like well over 500 stars.
Wow.
And that's all I did. I just took fast.ai 1, converted it to fast.ai 2. But we're talking like converting GAN code, converting tabular, converting text, converting computer vision. And what this allowed me to do is say, okay, these are my fundamentals. This is what I understand. This is how it's done in V2 now, and also try and do it in a way that can help other people understand it as well. Because basically, anytime I wrote something, my target audience was me from 6 months ago when I was just starting. And that's kind of the trend that's continued. I'll vary between like 6 month ago me or 2 year ago me, and keep it at that low level, but throughout the notebook get to a more complex level so that I understand it better. And then hopefully someone else does too. And that, trickled on into Walk with Fast AI. That's exactly how I did it. It was, what does Jeremy not teach? What do I think is important? Learn everything I can about it, and then reverberate it out to the community and hope that it sticks.
Yeah. Now, in addition to writing and teaching, you've been a major contributor to Fast AI. So in addition to Jeremy and Sylvain, you're one of the main people in the GitHub repo as far as additions to Fast AI. And I know Jeremy maintains really high standards for collaboration. And I know a lot of people who are interested in getting started professionally with coding will sometimes, it's recommended, get really involved with an open source project of some kind and contribute. And so, what's it like contributing to a project in terms of professional conduct and following style and writing tests and CI stuff? Yeah, tell us a bit about the involvement or what other people might expect if they were to try and get involved in a big open source project.
I mean, it was a learning curve. Being a software design and development major, like all of the last 3 courses that I have to take are all software engineering, and it's different applications of software engineering. So I kind of had this sort of understanding, but that was even well after I had started contributing though. The learning curve was harsh. One thing I'm very appreciative of Jeremy though is he spent the time to try and teach me, like, this is how we do things. This is how you should do it right. I mean, I still put in PRs where all of a sudden, like 5 minutes later, I go, oh shoot, that test failed. Here's a quick fix. I'm so sorry. It doesn't have to be perfect. And, it is just Jeremy now. And so a lot of it is him relying on you to know that, like, you're doing something right and you have an idea. Back it up with, safety measures and documentation. And the probably best way to get started with any project is just work on documentation. It's easy. You don't have to write code. You're just writing basically your experiences. If you're frustrated about not finding something in the documentation, okay, well, part of it is, the library owner's fault, but don't yell about it. Contribute to it.
Yeah.
Put the solution out there for people to find later. That is the easiest way to become involved in open source and have a meaningful impact, because if it affects you it's affected at least 20 to 30 other people minimum. And so even just a one sentence phrase somewhere in the documentation that's relevant to where you started looking can help a lot of people.
That's great. Okay, next question, changing gears a little bit. It's kind of a three-parter. And I'll say all three. How did you get connected with or employed at Novetta, and what is Novetta, and what do y'all do? And to the extent that you're allowed to tell us, what's their interest in deep learning? How do they intend to get paid based on what you're doing? And then probably a longer discussion, the fact that you're not at Google or Facebook or OpenAI or some massive place where people are starting to say, oh, the models are getting too big. There's no place for small shops to contribute anymore. We're all just going to be renting models from other people. And your thoughts on all that stuff. Let you go with that.
Sure. So let's start with how the heck I actually got here. Actually through the fast.ai forums and through community involvement. I had a senior manager at the time, Mueller, just send me a DM over the fast.ai forum saying, hey, I think you'd be a good fit for this internship. Go ahead and apply, and let me know when you have. And so I did. And a few weeks later, I got an interview with him and two other folks. And pretty much the entire interview was just discussing my projects. There was no code test. There wasn't a, do you complete this checklist of skills that we need? It was a genuine conversation over the struggles I faced with the project, how I overcame them, and where the inspiration came from. We bounced back and forth between, I think, 3 of my different projects over the course of like an hour and a half. And then, at the end, yes, there was a questionnaire of, do you know AWS? Have you done anything with data management? And to answer those truthfully, it's okay to say no. They don't expect you to say yes to all of them. Only a few of them if they're a good company, because they know that no one person is a full stack developer. Otherwise, you're probably looking at the wrong company if you want that, because you should be making much more money than they're probably going to offer you. And that basically was how it went. And then a few weeks later, they shot me an offer for an internship. That was 2 summers ago, I think now. And so that's what I did. At the start of the pandemic, I had a virtual internship, which is as stressful as one can imagine. I'm very thankful that they didn't just decide to close off the internship and say, we're not doing it. Instead, they took the dive and went, okay, we'll try this virtual thing and see how it goes. For your second question of like, what is Novetta? Basically what we do is try and help identify pieces of information in large amounts of data and attempt to like automate little tasks so that people can focus on high value tasks that have meaning. So basically automate the boring stuff, but with deep learning. Primarily, we're a service company. So basically what that means is we make money by charging people's time to develop solutions. And usually this aligns with some of the government's most challenging problems from a technical perspective. And on your open-ended question of what is it like to not work at Google or Facebook, it is definitely very different. I am essentially my own team currently. I have a manager, we have our own teams, but everyone has their own projects, essentially. You might have 1 or 2 people working on one, but everyone in my sector, which is called the Machine Learning Center of Excellence, everyone has an expertise. And so you are the local knowledge bank of this. People are going to come to you specifically for advice, and you have projects aligned to your specific interests. And, we're definitely more of a special case because we do actually have fairly decent compute power. But, we still use Google Colab on the side occasionally if we're doing like rapid prototyping. But like from a data processing perspective, so like what's it like gathering data and labeling it and all that? It's one-man teams. I currently have someone on my team who for the last few weeks has been hand labeling segmentation data. Yes. So, the weekly update is, hey, I got through another 500 images, maybe. So it's definitely a very different experience. I do like how it's a medium-sized company, especially now that we got acquired by Accenture. It's grown even more, but yeah, I like that basically at my work, everyone knows everyone. I can email the vice president and say, "Hey, can I sit down with you for 15 minutes and just pitch an idea? This is what I'm thinking," and he'll find time. So it's a very open workspace where you're not afraid to just go talk to someone, and that I thoroughly like.
That's great. How do you, I'm going to put this in a broader context. There's sometimes issues with at businesses where they say the data science team or the machine learning team or whatever the title is, that these people are too concerned about their models and their science, and they're not able to interact with the company in terms of the goals of managers and businesses and turning a profit and stakeholders and things. And so how do you balance kind of your desire to geek out on these things with the need to communicate effectively and collaborate effectively with the business needs of the organization?
So we're a little special in the fact that most everyone up our stack up to the vice president is familiar with the space. So our vice president actually knows what's going on. He knows like, oh, this is the tech. And so, well, yeah, I can't go and say like, here's a GAN, here's this model, here's these specific layers and what all they do. Instead, you kind of practice and learn what not to say. So this started off with me basically calling my best friend, who is a herpetologist, that is a biologist that studies snakes. He knows nothing about machine learning and AI. And I just talked to him about non-like work projects, but AI projects I've done, and see where he struggles with understanding and where he does understand, and slowly work towards bridging that gap. Because if you don't have good communication skills, you're not going to get very far. Because in situations like this, where I need to tell a manager, hey, this is what this model is doing, this is what you need to be careful about, and this is how it works, in a level to someone where they go, oh, it's a black box. You have to be very particular about how you define things and describe them. One of my professors here at the University of West Florida, who is probably my favorite out of the entire faculty, Dr. Brian Eddy, does an excellent job of this, because he managed to explain Docker to an entire class who, except for 3 people, didn't know what that was in 5 minutes, and everyone understood it.
Wow.
And he does it fantastically well. And so I've had him for multiple classes. And so as I try and explain things, as I teach things, I've really tried to emulate what he does. Because if you can explain something as complex as Docker to a bunch of tech students who have only known Java and maybe one virtual image, it works. It genuinely works. And with the whole geeking out thing, there's always new tech. And thankfully, with what I work in my role, we actually do actively look at that new tech, because we're called the Machine Learning Center of Excellence. We would not be that if we were using outdated tech. And so, there's a fair amount of geeking out. When Jeremy comes out with a new library, or Hugging Face comes out with a new model, you kind of sit there and go, well, how do I learn this? How do I try and use this? And so I pitch ideas constantly to my boss. Every 2 weeks, it's, hey, Shauna, I have an idea. Sometimes she'll say yes and give me, 20, 30 hours to go just explore. Most of the time she doesn't, because usually, at least at first, there's not a company benefit towards it. But I mean, it's always nice or it's not really always nice. It's good to constantly try and pitch your ideas how you can. and use your voice, because you don't know what will happen unless you do. Prime example, lib to nbdev, which is my library that converts regular Python libraries into nbdev versions, which is a one-time process. I pitched for, I think, 2 weeks to my boss before she was finally like, okay, take 2 days, do it. Those 2 days became a month and a half.
Yeah.
A presentation at work, an open source library, and I've heard folks at Hugging Face that are using this. So, if you have ideas, pitch them. If it doesn't 100% fit, okay, check and see if you can just go do it on your own. I've got a few projects later right now that are basically that. It doesn't quite fall in the scope of what we do, but that's not going to stop me from going and doing it. I'm just going to go do it and be unpaid for it, which, yeah, it's not as fun because, there is no dollar sign at the end of the day, but it's still something you wanted to do. And so you should explore where your mind wants to take you.
That's great. Okay. I want to make sure we have plenty of time for Q&A, but I do have a couple more questions I kind of thought of beforehand. So obviously as a software engineering major, you're really strong in that area where some people, including myself, really just kind of had to pick up what I could along the way, but I had a formal training in, calculus and linear algebra and all these kinds of things. What were some of the things that you really had to kind of teach yourself, maybe the math part or something, or statistics? How did that fit in, and what was that like, and what would you say to a fellow student in a similar circumstance?
I haven't taken a real math course in 5.5 years. I took AP Stat in high school and AP Cal in high school. That's the last math course I've seen. If you really want to do this field, you don't need the math in the beginning. That's not to say I'm not. The moment I graduate, I'm going to go take a calc refresher, matrix calculus, and God knows what else. But the key is understanding the soft skills, understanding, this is how the code works. This is how the library works, and utilizing that. You don't need to know how a CNN works back to front to do AI well, really machine learning well. What you need to be able to do is use the tool that's given to you. So like part of the struggle with me actually wasn't the machine learning part. It was the code and understanding the concepts. Because the amazing thing Jeremy does with fast.ai is if you take the library as a course study, I was hitting ideas that I was getting taught 2 or 3 weeks later in school, constantly. The idea of callbacks, object-oriented programming, inheritance, all of this. If you just take the fast.ai course or library and really study it, not necessarily to the full extent of the ground up, but from top down. So you start at the high level, understand how that works, understand the transforms, and understand what interactions are going on there. You'll get enough coding soft skills to where you're desirable because you can work with APIs. Right now, you're a lot more marketable if you can work with PyTorch or TensorFlow or fast.ai or PyTorch Lightning, where you understand how the APIs work and how the whole fit goes together, rather than someone that's implementing a language model from scratch or implementing a GAN from scratch. Those soft skills will take you so much further in the beginning than trying to focus on the math and being scared that you don't know enough.
Yeah, and that's a comment I had made early on in one of our earlier lessons, was that the way things are tending to go in the really active coding world is people are not writing their own models from scratch. They're grabbing models from other places. And you've mentioned Hugging Face a few times. We're going to use Hugging Face models in a couple weeks. Whereas some of us who really come from the deep science background, we really do want to go deep into the algorithms and the math and things. But it's kind of a question of, well, how fast do you want to get up and running? Because a lot of the really interesting stuff with the AI comes, as you say, not so much from the minutia, although that's important, but the being able to put something together and then kind of see how it works.
And that, I think, is the biggest trap. Trying to understand the algorithm rather than understanding that it just works. And you should do it, and later on you'll learn it. if you have that in your mind and are constantly remembering, yes, I will need to learn this eventually, but it's okay not to right now because I'm using it. It helps with the imposter syndrome a bit because you're acknowledging it. You know that you don't know enough about it, but that's because you want to get the other skills first so that once you do know enough about it, you can actually go and use it.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to stop the recording, but we're going to keep going. We're going to do Q&A with everybody that's still here. And then I'll edit this video down slightly and we'll post it up, and there will be a transcript available as well. So once again, Zach Mueller, everybody, here comes the recording stop.